everybody, and welcome to the latest episode of Let's Talk Astrology. Today, I'm delighted to introduce highly esteemed astrologer, author, and teacher, Cornelia Hansen. Cornelia has served the astrological community for over 40 years, specializing in child development, and also is the author of Kid Wheels, Understanding the Child in the Chart. So thank you so much, Cornelia, for joining us today, and how are you doing?
I'm fine, thank you. Thank you for asking me.
Absolutely wonderful. So today's topic, we're going to be talking more specifically about temperament and what information we can glean from the chart. And you have a wonderful presentation put here together today. And so let's dive in.
Okay. Well, first let's talk about what is temperament. Well, we know that it comes from the Latin, from the Romans and the Greeks. We measure it on the chart usually. They just add up the elements and the qualities, etc. My approach comes from modern child development studies. I was getting my degree in child development, early childhood, when I was also taking astrology with Marion March and Joe McEvers. And I said, well, since astrology uses temperament, then why can't I do a research with children? Because I was working at that time in a nursery, in a LAUSD childhood learning center. So I've got a wonderful opportunity. So I got permission to do this study and worked very hard for a couple of years and developed a system. Took a while, but anyway, the most important thing here is we know that it's a mixture. The bottom says temperament is an individual's behavioral style and characteristic way of emotionally responding. So that's an easy way of putting it so we can understand it. The other thing about temperament is that it offers a safe platform for astrologers to talk about a child, because I know they come as I've done them as infants, but I can give the parents a lot of cues about what this particular child needs. What about temperament in the modern point of view? It's very big in child development, but I don't think a lot of people know about it. What are characteristics of temperament? The more important thing is that it's present at birth. So that means that any child, no matter where they come from or what race they are, what religion they are, what place they come from, every child has a temperament when they're born, because it's basically biological and it's largely inherited. And it defines the behavioral style of the child. Some kids are bouncing all over the place and other kids are more laid back, that kind of thing. The important thing is that it's measurable and observable, which means it can be researched, because it just takes a lot of observation, which is what I did. Okay, personality forms from the interaction of the temperament with the physical and social environment. Sometimes there's a good fit, sometimes there isn't, depending on the temperament. If you think about your own childhood, which parent did you feel easiest with? Did you feel comfortable with? Or you had brothers and sisters, some you got along with, some you didn't. It's basically due to temperament. So personality is important because it develops that interaction. So it's not determined by genes. It's not totally by the environment. It's a mixture. How do you fit into this family? And where are there some frictions because of their difference in temperament? So we look at, is there a deficit of one of the components, or is there an excess? That goes back at the Greek humors that we talked about. So we want to go on and look at some of what are the components that make up temperament. Okay.
Absolutely. And you're talking about temperament and present at birth. So we're looking at the birth chart as a snapshot of the planets in the skies at that particular time, looking at temperament, but you're also bringing the factor environmental factors. So someone might grow up with either two parents, or maybe even a single parent household, or maybe even adopted, or be in a home, all those kind of things. So you bring in the importance of environmental factors in too, whether someone is born into poverty or whether they're born into the middle class, and what country, environmental factors they belong
Yes, exactly. Yes. also where you're born. A child raises on a farm is going to have a lot of different experience than a kid who's raised in a city.
Absolutely.
Well, these are the original components that were determined by this longitudinal study that Thomas Chess and Burst did. They were in New York. They did it for they followed these babies all the way up to adulthood, and they've written several books about temperament, but their research was really profound, and they've been followed since then. So this is the components that they found. Now, the activity level, is the child one of those ones that's constantly on the go, getting into things, or are they more comfortable just where you sit them? You know, they sit down, they're happy with a toy or something for a while.
My son is
Distractibility.
the distractible one. He's got a Sun Mars conjunction, so he's always on the go. A lot of energy.
Okay, a lot of energy. Yeah, distractibility. Now, that's another component. Whereas, let's say the baby's nursing a bottle and somebody walks in the room, and then the child drops the bottle, is looking around. What happened? What's going on? The other child will just stay focused and not pay any attention at all. So we measure that. And the next one is called intensity. Now, this is the emotional component. Sometimes their kids are loud, they scream, they're happy, they jump up and down, and other childs are more quiet, more serious. That intensity can be, a problem for parents, especially when you're out in the public. Okay.
And as you mentioned before, environment is quite interesting. You might have a child at home that's quite boisterous, bouncing from walls to walls, but when they're in public, they may be a bit more stoic and more aware of their surroundings. It's quite interesting putting children in different environments and seeing how they behave in that sense.
Exactly. The regularity I didn't research, because basically it's only a problem with one type. The other ones are much more important. So we'll talk about the sensory threshold. How much of a stimulus does there have to be in order for the child to react to it? Some children can sleep through anything. Other children wake up with any sound, That sensory threshold. Approach withdrawal. This is the child's first initial response to anything new. He's presented with a new food, a new toy, a new experience, a new person. What is their first reaction? Do they hang back? Are they hesitant? Or do they just, oh, come right in, get right in? You see that in preschool children when they come in, whether they're going to jump into the activities or whether they're just going to hide behind mom for a while.
Holding on to the coat of the parents, and then
Yes.
or they just run away and get straight into the action.
Right. So the question is then, if they have withdrawal, how long is it going to take them to adapt to this new situation? And some children adapt quite quickly. If they have high adaptability, then they may be hesitant at first, but they adapt very quickly. Some kids got used to preschool in a day or two. Some children could come right in. Other children, sometimes it took weeks before they need time to kind of observe everything before they join in. So the next thing is persistence, and we want to measure persistence. This child can stick to a task until they finish it or complete it, or is their attention wander? So they start something and then they get bored with it and they move on to something else and they don't complete things. So it's important to measure their persistence with distractibility. Which one is higher, which one is lower?
Maybe a heavy elements, modality of mutability and starting one thing, going on to the next thing, or whether they have more of a fixed chart, all those kind of elements. I think
yes, exactly. Yes, right. The mood is what you see in their general overall behavior. Some children are very smiley and friendly and outgoing, and some children hang back. They're more, withdrawn until they get used to it. So we look at that, is the glass empty or half full, and we look at that through the elements. Fire and water fire and air are very outgoing, whereas water and earth are much more Passive.
So you bring in polarity there, whether it's more of an outward expression or more with a, like have you said, more of a withdrawn and inner.
Right, right.
Yeah.
So these are the elements that I researched. And what happens is that when you get them all together, they come up. Chesa Birch found that they formed a pattern, and you could see the three of the basic types are like the easy child, which is like 40% of children are easygoing. They're friendly, they're outgoing, they're adaptable, etc. Then you have the slow to warm up child that we used to call the shy child. I was one of those. It took me a while to adapt to something. And then they're about 15 to 20% of children. And the difficult child is rare. There about 10% of children have a difficult profile. I don't like to call them difficult. I call them challenging.
Right.
You'll see why when we talk about these. Now, these are the basic temperamental types: the easy child, the slow to warm up child, the difficult child. Then you have the child with low activity. These are the child that take time to get somewhere, and you're constantly nagging at them to keep going, keep going. And the more you nag at them, the slower they get,
Yeah.
till they work into real procrastinators. The opposite of that, of course, is the high activity child that needs to get out there and get that energy up. If they're cooped up in a small apartment all day, they don't get a chance to release all that energy. So it's important to get them out and let them release all of it. Then you have the child with intense reactions. Those are the ones when you're out in public and you hear some kids screaming and having a fit, and you look over and I'm like, oh, what's wrong with
What's
that
going
child?
on there? And
Yeah,
sometimes you look at the poor mother or father, and they're
yes, and you
trying
look
to
at the mother
appease
and
the
father.
child.
Why aren't they? Yeah, so why aren't they doing something about it? Uh, and poor parents have to deal with it. Then you have the highly distractible child. These are the children who are, if they're sitting in a classroom, the person next to them talking, well, they'll immediately your attention will go there, or somebody walks in, the door opens, the phone rings, whatever. They're immediately looking at that than they are paying attention to what they're supposed to be. So you can see that teachers would prefer kids that have a warm, happy mood, that they're adaptable to things, and that they're persistent enough to finish a task and pay attention in the classroom. When I was teaching high school, I used to have a box of what I call fidgets, because I find these highly distractible kids like need something in their hands to be moving or doodling on their paper or something that helped them concentrate better. And the only problem with those fidgets was somebody was always taking them.
What,
So
what,
they
what would
could
your
use them.
opinion be, maybe the future of schooling? Because I know my child's very much like that. He needs the energy, extra recess to get that energy out. But I find it must be very difficult for some children to sit there for so many hours in a day and concentrate and either read. Because school in England for us, a lot of it was just copying things off the board and paying attention, sitting very stoic and still. There wasn't a lot of liberalism in terms of moving around or jumping around and talking. It was very quite strict.
Yes, the only school that I know that bases their educational stuff on the arts is also very keenly aware of temperament.
Yeah.
So they know, like my grandson went to a Waldorf school, and he's highly distractible. The teacher always put him between two quiet little girls who wouldn't engage. That helped him to focus better.
Wonderful.
So we have all these things to help. Now we want to talk about, how do we measure temperament? Okay. This is based on my research, and I used the elements and the modalities, this energy approach of Stephen Arroyo, and that's his book, Astrology, Psychology, and the Four Elements. And he talks about different elements being compatible and some are not. So that's another point. And so I made up six worksheets that have the components on them, which we'll look at in a minute. We look at aspects to the ascendant and other angles, because if you see the angles, anything close to any of the angles affects early childhood. So that's nice to know. The other thing I do is I don't use the 4th, 10th as father, mother. Okay. Because in today's world, sometimes the father is the mother, you know.
Right.
We have to look at it more as a balance between the fourth house, which is nurturing, which is caring, which is, you know, giving the child that trust in their beginning. The 10th house is what the parent expects of the child. Do they want them to be academic? Do they want them to be football stars? I mean, so because they have an influence, and they're the ones that set the boundaries. And that's a job for both parents, not just one. I mean, it used to be that the father did the punishment and the mother did the nurturing, but it's not that way anymore. Both do both things.
And as you're saying, as society is progressing, some of the traditional roles aren't the same anymore. So even having to look at the charts differently as maybe
Yes,
in previous decades, absolutely.
yes, I think that's really important. This is an example of the first worksheet I use. So when I'm looking at a child's chart, now this happens to be Hayden, I write about him in the book. Because I knew the parents and I knew him and his sister when they were born and did their charts. So the mother and father were prepared more or less on what kind of temperament the child had. So you can see I worked out a system. I went through many systems of how people add up points for the temperament for the different signs and the modalities you can see. So I have them here. I write down the sign the sun is, etc., all of those things, and they all add up to 100. Then I have the elements, so I can go down and find out how much fire there is as compared to water or anything else. Then I look at the qualities, and you put them both together and you get the astrological type. Now, the reason that's important is because quite often, now Hayden happens to be cardinal water. It's very pronounced in his chart. But at the same time, my grandson, who's a Taurus, when you add up all the points, is really a Gemini. He's fire and fire and air, and so he behaves much differently than
You talked about certain elements working well together. So I would surmise that the air and the fire qualities work quite well together, as well as the earth water elements.
right.
Is that
Yes, right.
wonderful?
I'm glad he had a Taurus sun in the first house because it kind of gave him some stability,
Grounding.
some
Wonderful.
grounding. Yeah. And here you see that Hayden has no earth. So we always want to look at when there's an element missing, what that means. This is the second half of that worksheet. Okay, so here I can write down what's lacking. So he has no earth whatsoever and very little air. The overemphasis is on water. And I do the compatible combinations, and this is going to help me understand the quality of the mood. And you can see here that he has 75 points in water, earth. Now, the point system is just something I worked up in order to be able to compare things.
Right.
Okay, so he has a lot of water and earth and not as much air and fire. But I also look at the incompatible combinations because they are like nuances. You don't often see them, but they will come out at times. Like, and I use the highest points. Like Hayden has high water fire. What does that mean? That means that he's like a warm bath most of the time. But if he's pushed too far because he tends to be a shy child, he's going to explode in anger.
That makes right. So we'll only take so much or absorb so much, but if they push too far, that fire pops out and anger comes
Right,
along. Right.
right. And I have a place on each sheet for you to write notes. So when you get through with all the 6 sheets, you have all these notes that you can put together and come up with a profile and then synthesize. So you can see here what I wrote about Hayden being sensitive and he has this timidity at new things, but you have to really tell the parent it's not their fault. It's not something they're doing. It's the child's temperament. And
Right.
you can't believe that sometimes the parents just go, you mean it's not me? No, it's not you. I mean, I had a mother in the nursery school who had a difficult child, a challenging child, and she thought she was doing something terrible wrong. And I gave her information about, the challenging child, which immediately relieved her guilt feelings and gave her some strategies you could use to work with him. Okay, so let's go
It
on
always
to
seems
the,
to be that the parents who worry the most are, by and large, the best parents. I find, at least they're conscious and aware. And but like I say, it's quite interesting. The parents can't blame themselves. I mean, as you said, it's the temperament of the child. I mean, that's who they are. And sometimes
yes,
you see some parents and they're the outgoing ones and always doing things, and you see the child and they're off in the corner, just not really engaged or bothered. So it's environment can only go so far, and as you say, it's the temperament of the child and what their makeup is.
exactly. And the problem is that most parents don't know about temperament. You know what I'm saying? When you I had two women come into a mommy and me class, and one of them had this outgoing, happy child, was into everything right away, and this other child was her friend's child was a little boy, and he was whining and complaining and negative and demanding, and she kept comparing them. You
Hmm.
do that as a mother. You look at other kids and say, what am I doing wrong? And when I told her, I said, it's his temperament, and I gave her information, oh, God, just a load of relief, and that's good. And that's what
Wonderful.
I think is important for astrologers to be able to do, to tell their child, tell the parent that this child is going to be shy, for instance. So it's not your fault that it takes them a while to adapt to something new. It's
Hmm.
cameras. So anyway, this is Hayden's chart, as you can see. Now he has a um, moon and sun both in Cancer, and the moon
Hmm.
rules all of those planets on the left side. The Uranus and Neptune are a mutual reception, and the Pluto and Jupiter are in mutual reception. So that moon in Cancer in the 12th houses, he tends to be, and also you look at his Leo ascendant, we
Hmm.
see that Leo. Oh, he's got Saturn sitting on it. Okay. And he's got the Mars there too. Now, I look at Mars and Saturn as I would look at Mars and Capricorn. I
Hmm.
think it gives him a certain amount of talent and sports, But he wasn't into sports, but his father was smart enough. He got him into karate, and
Ah.
he's now a black belt, you know.
Oh, wonderful, wonderful. I
Yeah,
mean, that Mars is quite prominent. It's angular. It's in the first
right,
house, rather whatever quadrant house system you use or whole sign. You've got the separating square to Jupiter, which I think is going to magnify that point as well. So, I mean, to keep that and to make that discipline, maybe the Mars Saturn conjunction to have that disciplined into and you said karate in terms of having that discipline and using that Mars healthily in that sense. That's wonderful.
right. And so also it's not a team sport, which he would be, have more difficulty adapting to a team. The other thing I could point out is the fact that the moon is trine Uranus. Now, his mother is a pathologist, so she was working, and the father was a stay-at-home dad. And you can see that the fourth house of nurturing is ruled by Venus, which is up there with the discipline, and it's in Gemini. And his father has a Gemini ascendant, and the mother has a Gemini moon.
Hmm.
So they do communicate with him well. They understand
Wonderful.
his shyness.
And you can
Now he
certainly see
has
the amount of water there because I've said we've got all the cardinal water or the Cancer planets. So we've got the light as well as
right,
Mercury. We have the Jupiter as well as the Uranus up there. So quite a heavily water chart. And I noticed before you said quite a shy child. Now, whether it's whole sign, it would be all in the 12th, the lights as well as Mercury. But even here, we've got the moon and Mercury in the 12th and the sun on the cusp of the 12th here. So
right,
even maybe more behind the scenes or wanting to not be
yes,
as prominent or as visible as other children might be, having that element there, and also with the polarity pulling in, it's the water pulling in. It's not
yes.
the outward polarity either, even though you've got the Leo ascendant with the Mars
And it's
and the
interesting
Saturn.
that he doesn't have any earth, but as a child, all through his childhood, he loved to work on very complicated Lego projects.
Oh,
Which,
wonderful.
so he spent a lot of time alone, and now that he's 17, he's planning on becoming an engineer, which I
Fantastic, absolutely wonderful.
exactly. And he has a Jupiter in the 4th house, which is a good sign that he had a lot of nurturing at home. Both his parents are Scorpios.
Ah.
And they understood that he was going to be a shy child, and they knew how to handle him. And it was a good match. They did a good job. Now, if you look at the 4th, 10th axis, it's mostly cardinal. And he's cardinal, which helps. But it's air, it's air and fire. And so that's a little bit off. So there's going to be some difficulty. But because the parents were informed about the child ahead of time, they knew what to expect, and they knew the strategies to use to help him deal with it. So there wasn't as much friction as there could have been.
Wonderful.
You see what I'm saying?
Wonderful. So they've got those angles. So you've got the Mars rule in the midheaven, you've got Venus rule in the IC. So you were explaining to these parents just how to help the child and how to help him develop in that.
Right, right. Okay, now this is another one of the worksheets. This is on how to determine distractibility. So every worksheet is how you use the chart and come up with whether the child is high, low, or balanced in a particular component like distractibility. So here we're looking at, if I want to determine mutability, I add up all of, if they have it on the worksheet in the front, the first worksheet, I'll have how much mutability there is. Then if they are preponderantly mutable, then I give them the 30 points. I look at the air fire predominance because that's more, tends to be quicker, faster than the other ones. Also, Mercury conjunct the ascendant helps with the distractibility, and also aspects to Mercury. Now, I did these by following children and assessing their behavior, and I had my staff also helping me because we were very big on observing children because we had to make reports out on them all the time and have conferences with the parent. And I look at where Mercury is also. Okay. So let's look at the next chart because I want people to understand that temperament is something you're born with. It can be modified or repressed. This is where you get into children reacting to their environment, which is both physical and social. So I wanted to show you that you can do it with adults too. And by looking at their temperament and determining that and looking at the parenting axis, you can also tell how they fit in or maybe where they had problems when they were children. Now, this is somebody I figure everybody knows.
If the word temperamental was assigned to anyone, it would probably be Donald Trump.
Yes, that's exactly what Hillary said about him. She said his temperament is not good for a president.
Right.
And she was right.
Absolutely true.
Now he's a mutable air type with characteristics of the highly distractible child, which include that he has a high approach to new things and high adaptability, but he also has very high distractibility and very low persistence. What does that mean? That means that he can't concentrate for very long. That's why he liked to have his memos with bullet points, because he's not a reader. And it was
they would say that the staff would have to come in and instead of giving him a long brief or detailed brief of what's going on, whether it's militarily or whatever it might be, as you said, they had to put bullet points in and even pictures, as you would do with a child, give someone pictures and explain it very shortly, within a minute or two, because he said after 5 minutes, his mind has already wandered off somewhere else.
Right. And he has very low persistence, so it's hard for him to stick to any one thing for a long period of time. He also has a high level of intensity of reaction when he gets frustrated. So I imagine as a child, he had temperament. He had, what would you call it, acting out. In fact, as a matter of one of the story tells us where he punched the second grade teacher in the nose because he didn't know how to teach or something.
I'm not surprised. And I heard another story where he was very, very little and using building blocks and apparently he glued them together so he didn't have to either share with another child or something along those lines. So, you know, those early
Yes.
temperamental behaviors was probably quite apparent.
Yes. And why he had trouble. His threshold of response, however, the mental chemistry, is a certain deliberate type. And now, in terms of their responding to the environment, they tend to focus on what they want or what they're afraid of.
Absolutely.
And they're more likely to stick their old ways in a stubborn manner. His short attention span and low persistence had caused a lot of problems in school, where he did a lot of acting out, that eventually he was sent to a military boarding school. And his tense reactions when anger created a tendency to act as a bully early in life. His high level of air water made him dream big. Remember, he has no earth too, like Hayden.
Right.
So he dreams big, and the high level of fire water contributes to that explosive reactions that he has to things. So he overcompensated for the lack of earth by building large buildings and projects like casinos. And here's this chart, and you can see that he has that Mars in Leo, but it's right on the ascendant. And Mars and Leo can be aggressive, which he certainly has been. Okay. He has the Sun conjunct his North Node, which shows that close relationship he had to his father. And his mother, the Moon is on the South Node, down in the 4th house. Now look, he's a Gemini, he's an air type, air fire, and he has what on the parenting axis? Taurus and Scorpio. So he doesn't really quite fit in there. And if you know his history, when he was 2 years old, his mother had his giving birth to his youngest brother, Robert, and she had a lot of complications and was in the hospital for quite a while. And so there wasn't a strong bond formed in that early, period, which is important for a 2-year-old. Whereas my mom, feeling abandoned. And you could see that the Saturn by solar arc conjuncted the Venus. And that's kind of interesting too, because his father was a workaholic, so he wasn't around. The housekeeper was not a babysitter. And this little boy was difficult to handle. And who took care of him was his 2 teenage sisters. So you can see how that Saturn and Venus have affected his life in terms of trusting people. Feeling abandoned as a 2-year-old is quite important.
And it's quite interesting temperament, and as you've talked about before, bringing in, I think this chart is heavily cardinal, so it obviously has a lot of energy to initiate and push things forwards. It has a lot of air, as you pointed out. We've got the Sun, Uranus, we've got the Neptune, Jupiter. I always find it interesting with this chart. We've got the Mercury Neptune square, although separating, and I always think to myself, the amount of lies he's told over the years, trying to pull the wool over people's eyes. And of course, I'm not speaking for KeplerCollege. This is just my personal points of view. I don't know how many MAGA astrologers we've got out there, but that Mercury Neptune square, the amount of lies he's talked. We've got that Mars on the ascendant, that bully,
and that's the only aspect it makes.
Right. Absolutely. And you mentioned before that the Mars on the ascendant. So if you remember where all the leaders met up for one of the conferences, and he just pushed past one of another leader from another country and just pushed him out of the way to make him feel like that, the Leo ascendant, that Mars, and that bully mentality and temperament that you mentioned before. Yeah.
Yes, and this is a bold pattern, which is intense and always reaching out into the environment. He's got Uranus leading the whole pack there, which is very erratic. And he is, we know, very erratic. You never know what he's going to do from day to day.
The Sun-Uranus connection, we've got that 4th quadrant heavily emphasized. So he always wants to be in public. I don't believe he's someone who's comfortable with self-reflection, being in a cabin, reading a book, or because that energy is so pushed in that 4th quadrant in the public eye that I feel like he feels vulnerable with his own thoughts. Maybe that's just my perspective, but that's the idea I get.
But when you look at the chart, it really reinforces all of that. And the Mars is in the 12th house, which means, what would you say? He doesn't like to be openly the bully, but he does allow other people to do it for him.
And he will take other people like January 6th to go and attack and stuff. And if you want to
Right.
blend house systems, use whole sign, I would see that Mars is angular as well. So, but in this course, you mainly use modern rulerships. Is that correct? In the
Yes.
course? Okay, okay,
Yes.
wonderful. But certainly a
And also
temperamental
you look
man.
at the Jupiter in the second house trines the Saturn, I mean the Uranus up there,
Hmm.
which shows you that the father kind of lived through him. His father, the older brother, wanted to be a pilot, and he didn't like that. So Donald actually became the favorite son. And whenever he got into trouble, his father pulled him out of it. You know, would give him money or whatever it was he needed because he had a lot of bankruptcies.
Very, very
And that
interesting chart, especially
that
when you use
Pluto,
the progressed planets and the progressed angles, and you see what goes on with Donald Trump. But that's a whole episode in itself. So I digress.
oh, well, the interesting thing I just noticed is because I'm interested in politics that at the end of the Republican convention, he's going to have Uranus and Taurus squaring his Mars, and he's going to have Mars squaring his ascendant. So
Yeah, yeah, coming
that
over
sounds
his
very powerful. So
midheaven. We'll
who
see.
knows what's going to happen then? Okay, let's go on to the next. And here we have his temperamental profile. So when I get through with all of these different sheets, I have all this information, and then I have to kind of synthesize together, okay, which I did at the bottom. His quality of mood is high, he's positive. He's always kind of outgoing, friendly. Okay, his approach withdrawal, he's very high in approach. He reaches out. His adaptability also is very high, but he tries to get people to adapt to him.
Right.
His threshold as a response, I said, is type 4, which is deliberate and certain. He approaches the environment in a deliberate kind of way. So, like, you know, when you walk into an environment, you kind of scan it to see if it's okay. And then you act in a certain way. How do you respond to it?
And it's a
He's
shame he has
looking,
such demagoguery behavior and awful
yeah,
comments to him, because really he has a lot of strengths in that. So he's a great marketer. And even if we go back to that Mercury Neptune, like he's good at marketing, selling. He picks up on words and he knows how to ram that home. And so in terms of marketing and being adaptable and reading, emotional intelligence in terms of reading people in a room, possibly is
yes,
quite high in terms of marketing. So if he didn't have all these negative qualities in his personality, it'd be, obviously he's being successful in business, and many will say he's done that through lies and charadery. But it's a shame he has these negative qualities, because some of these positive points actually work out well
yes.
for him.
Well, they did well for him, of course. Uh, so at the bottom, I wrote the temperamental type that he's highly distractible with low persistence. And you know that's going to be a problem in school. Like you said, kids can't sit still. He's high in his emotional responses, and he's a deliberate, certain thinker. So that's going to affect his whole personality.
There's
So
a
you
full
can see
moon
that,
energy as well. I think that adds to the extra energy and
yes,
emotional reactivity
right.
that he has as well.
And
Absolutely.
because he was like, I would have, as a parent, I would have taken him to a doctor and found out that he was ADD, and he could have been treated for that. But his mother was not around. His father wasn't, he's a workaholic, and his sisters probably did not know how to set boundaries with him and probably just let him have his way, which increased that narcissism. I want what I want when I want it.
Yeah.
So that was part of his upbringing. I always look at these things that, I don't know. We talk about free will. But the thing about temperament is that you can learn to deal with it if you understand it. If someone teaches you as a child that you're distractible and gives you strategies to help it, then you could be all right. You can't tell a parent the child's temperament without giving them some strategies on how to work with it, What do you do with a distractible child? You put them in a quiet place to do their homework. You give them frequent breaks so they can have, say, do a couple of problems in math and then take a break and then come back and do two more, so they get a sense of success. And
Absolutely.
before they leave home, have you got everything that you're supposed to have? You put a list on the door, check them off as you go. And it's the same thing when you come home from school. Don't forget your jacket and your lunchbox,
Absolutely.
because they lose things all the time.
So I'd like to ask you more about your research that you developed over the years. So can you tell us about what made you begin that particular research, and what your results and what you found?
Well, I said it was a combination of working in a learning center, the child learning center, and learning astrology from from Marion and all of a sudden the names leave me.
Mary March and
Mary and March, yes. Okay.
Yeah.
They were very impressive.
I'd love to be a fly on the wall at that time. Brilliant.
So it was,
brilliant
yes,
astrology.
it was a combination of having both, learning about temperament and astrology, and then learning it while I was getting a master's in child development. And so I said, well, gee, I should be able to research that. I love research. And so I said, I'm going to set this up. First, I had to get approval from the district. So they gave me approval. I sent questionnaires home to the mothers to give me their view of how the child behaved and using those temperamental components. And then I started with observation sheets on each component, and my whole staff worked with me. I had another teacher and 2 aides. So there were 5 of us. We had one short aide and 2 long aides. One worked 8 hours, one worked 3 hours. But anyway, they could do the observations because they were used to that. Once I explained what to do, I gave for high activity. If you're working outside in the yard, watch the kid. Does he display this behavior, or is he slower? What activities does he preserve, etc. So we did that for each component until I had every single one of them. And because they were in the center, their birth certificates had to be on file. So then I took all of the children's worksheets and I would put them in piles. Like if I was studying active, I put all the high active ones here and the low active ones there. And I would look at their charts and see what they had in common in terms of activity level, and came up with signatures. As you saw on the sheets, would be maybe 5 components and would give them numbers according to which one was most prominent. Like if you look at somebody with high reactions, I had a child that had Mars conjunct the moon in Aries. You knew there was a lot of energy when he put out those emotions. He screamed at the top of his lungs, So I would take the one that was the most frequent, and the other ones that appeared, and put them down according to their how often they were there in the signature.
Wonderful.
So I developed in the whole system, and then I said, well, how am I going to measure them? I'm going to have to use a point system. And then I made myself a little bell curve. I said, okay, well, these kids fall in the middle. They're pretty normal. And these other kids are either going to be high or low, or super high or super low. Wonderful. And so that was the whole thing. It took me quite a while to get that all together. But then I presented it in AFA has a research journal they put out once a year. So my work was published in theirs in 2018.
Marvelous. And research is so important for the subject of astrology. Would you mind mentioning some of the ethical considerations that you have to keep in mind when working with
Well, that's what I listened to a podcast one time where they were talking about children, and these astrologers were expressing their feeling intimidated by doing a child's chart. What are the ethical considerations? What can I tell them that is not going to influence their perception of the child? So a lot of people kind of tend to stay away from children and don't do children at all. And the interesting thing is that this younger generation of mothers are so interested in astrology, because we have this Facebook group of young mothers, and they want to learn better parenting by understanding their child through astrology. and it really works. The system really works. I've had students from, I had a student recently from Greece sent me an email saying how much she loved the class and how much she's doing with it and how well it works. So
Absolutely wonderful.
yes, and if you have the research and you show that it works, and you can say to an astrologer, you can safely talk about the child's temperament.
Wonderful, wonderful. And speaking about courses, you've taught with Kepler for the last couple of years. So would you like to talk more about your class working with parents and children? And that will be coming up soon. So anyone watching, I'll leave a link in the description box and comments as well.
Yes. Well, the class is 5 weeks long, and we cover everything in the book from the beginning, what temperament is and how it works. And then we talk about the components. They learn about the components. Then we start going through the worksheets. We also talk about family styles because you have democratic kind of parents and you have others that are more authoritarian or permissive, and that has an effect on the child. So we talk about the polarity of the parenting axis and what this means in terms of the parents' expectations of the child, how they set rules or not, or boundaries. And that's an important thing too, setting boundaries. So you want to know, we cover all of that. And there's been a lot of research in school also. In fact, one of my students went out and gave her nursery school teacher a bunch of my books.
Wonderful.
Yes, it would be great. It's great to understand that in
and the work you're doing is so important. And I mean, of course, being a parent myself, just how to help children develop and understand their temperament and the best ways and some of the solutions to do, and whether if it's a more active child, whether it's a more stoic or different types of temperaments, and it really helps parents. And like I say,
yes, I also give them a lot of references. I give them a lot of references.
Wonderful.
Where they can go for information, because it's big on the internet now. You can go anywhere and talk about the difficult child or the shy child or whatever it is you're interested in. But there's plenty of places that you can learn about temperament and what the different components are.
Wonderful.
I wish it was more broadcast more often. People got used to the whole idea because they started using it in schools. Like I said, there's been a lot of research in schools, and also on the challenging child. That's a difficult. There's one guy in New York who specializes in working with parents with difficult children, because otherwise they're the ones that most often develop behavioral problems, and they drop out of school and get into trouble and have problems in relationships. So you want to help parents be able to give them what they need in order to prevent that.
Absolutely, absolutely. Such an important topic, and the work you're doing is absolutely marvelous. So thank you for joining me today in this episode.
Oh, well, thank you for the opportunity. I just love to share my work with everybody.
It's, again, such an important topic, and to help others, and you have people messaging you saying how much you've helped them with their own children, which is absolutely wonderful over the decade. So for everybody watching, if you would like more information of the course, please see the link below this video in the description box and comment box, and sign up for Cornelia's course, which is coming up very soon. So thank you again so much, Cornelia, for joining me today, and I'd love to have you back on at another time.
Okay, great. Thanks.
Wonderful. Thank you everyone for watching. Goodbye.
Bye.